Welcome to the Cinematologist podcast. I'm Daryl Linares, and of course, he's here. It is author and all-round expert on music films, which is what we're going to discuss. It's Professor Neil Fox. How are you doing, Neil?
What an intro. I was going to say it's really nice to have you back introducing the podcast. That's your first introduction. But if you're going to introduce me like that all the time, then you could do all of them.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sounds good to me.
Well, no, it was funny. You know what? I was actually thinking, should we kind of move away from our, time immemorial way of doing it and just try and come in a more languid, we're in the middle of just chatting kind of way, like I don't know. But I guess maybe people are expecting, they like familiarity, don't they?
Yeah, I've thought about that sometimes, but I think then you just get into a position of overthinking what it could be that's different, and there is a real comfort of this is how we do it kind of thing, which is nice. But yeah, who knows? Maybe I think we change up a lot of stuff. Yeah, we just keep
let's just keep that anchoring point there, as it were. Just on the back of last week, I wanted to say thanks for sort of being so engaged in all of that. Obviously, my and promoting my Substack as well. Those of you who've read the Substack, I really appreciate it. But I found the conversation really, really useful to sort of collectivize some ideas, which was in the last post. But also, it kind of fed into kind of some of the questions I think that I'm going to talk to you today about music films. What's the subtitle? I'll give it its full subtitle. So your book is called Music Films, Documentaries, Concert Films, and Other Cinematic Representations of popular music. I've spent the last week or so reading about. I've got about 75% of the way through, enough to be able to ask you questions and feel like I know what I'm talking about anyway. But where are you in the sort of cycle now? Because I know that you obviously I was there at the BFI where you did the launch, but you've got other events coming up, and I just wondered maybe to start with, how are you feeling about the reception to it, the conversations that you've had, the other podcasts I know that you've been on, how are you sort of feeling about it now? It's out in the world, or it has been for a little while.
Feeling really nice about it. It came into the world in a difficult period of my life, so when it first came out, I was kind of looking backwards on it with much more mixed feelings in terms of how I went about writing it. I think was I was reflecting on that quite a lot. And I think it's natural to have kind of doubts and kind of be overly sensitive about it a lot, which I very much was when it was kind of gearing up to come out. And I feel a little more, much more sanguine about it now in terms of what people might say about it, how they might engage with it. And a lot of that has been because it's been really nice to have it out in the world, and to get a response from it. So a lot of the photos in the book, all the photos in the book are from filmmakers who I know or I've met through the process of writing the book, and they donated the images for the book for free, and in return they get a copy of the book. So there was a kind of month there where a lot of the filmmakers I'd spoken to just responding really kindly about receiving the book, and just so there's been things like that which are really nice. And then the events which I'm kind of putting together myself, which is basically, well, apart from the one in Manchester which I was invited to, kind of putting together these events where I'm talking to filmmakers about the subject, not really the book, but the subject of music films in its kind of broadest sense. So kind of reaching out to filmmakers in different parts of the world, in cities that I really want to visit again for the first time, and then just being really excited to be like, yeah, let's do that. So next month I'm in New York, and Alex Ross Perry and I are doing a conversation at the Roxy in Manhattan, which, similar to the BFI, was like, it's actually a kind of dream come true. So if nothing else from this book, I get to do these events, and I'm doing one in Manchester with Carl Hunter, who's been on the podcast, and obviously the BFI with Caroline Katz was just, that's what I want to take away from the experience more than I want to take away anything else. Like just, feeling like it's a subject that's connected with people whose work I really admire and respect, even if they don't necessarily make the kinds of films I write about in the book.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that whenever you do a piece of work of any kind, there is the sort of pleasure and the toil of doing the work. Then there's, as you say, the sort of fear and, anticipation of it coming out and what will happen. But then suddenly after that, it becomes, I don't know how much of a kind of, but how much of a follower of Bart you are in terms of it. It's not your book anymore. It's everyone's kind of thing, But also I think that the pleasure then becomes in the, you use the word paratext a lot in the book. It becomes about the para experience. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, well, yeah, the book is there and I've done it, but let's just talk about either, the Rolling Stones, or let's talk about Milford Graves, which hopefully we're going to do in a little bit. Whoever it might be, or music film as a where that's one of the interesting subjects I think is where is music film now in terms of the music industry, music culture as it's currently configured? Because I think one of the interesting parts of your book is that question of do music films have a validity, or is the validity of them waning in the way that kind of music as a coherent cultural medium or media is kind of fracturing, or has fractured, since the arrival of the internet.
Yeah. And it's, I love music and I love film, and I'm really interested in that space where they both occupy. And it's been really rewarding to have conversations where people have, kind of asking the same questions by enjoying the book that I was asking while I was writing it, and that in music films is a conversation that hasn't happened before. That's what feels kind of new and is exciting about being in that space, is we're actually having conversations about this. Everything around music films has been kind of taken for granted and not discussed for a very, very long time. And still is the case, really. It still privileges the music.
You mentioned a few books that do actually cover the subject, but in the sort of gestation of this, which I'm assuming kind of like you had in your mind for a very long time in terms of wanting to write a book about music films, what was where did you want to position this in relation to other books that have covered this subject?
In two places, really. One is more films, as in the stuff that's written before really, really kind of narrowly focuses on what might be called a canonical set of films. There isn't a canon in music film. It's never had that kind of focus, but there are, that through the repetition of lists and kind of focus, and also the scale and the stature of the artists, there is this kind of canon of films that is what all of those books kind of circle around largely. They all focus on Gimme Shelter, Don't Look Back, Hard Day's Night, Woodstock, up to Stop Making Sense. But then, so I wanted to kind of expand the focus beyond those films, even though, to films that came out at the same time. So they were talking about more, but one of the main goals was to look at films from the 2000s onwards, and really look at this century as actually a kind of where music film becomes something, quite specific, very, very contentious, very, very contested, messy, but also really innovative and interesting, in a way that there's such a consistency of them, and there's such a consistency of really, really good and interesting ones, in a way that, apart from the explosion, it's sort of like from like 64 to 72, they're much more sporadic in terms of when the films that have retained a kind of cultural value come out. And again, part of it's subjective. A lot of the films that got me into music films were films that came out from sort of the mid to late 90s and onwards, rather than, the early stuff, which I then loved when I went back to it. But they weren't like, Don Letts' West Way to the World film about the Clash, which I write about right at the very end, is like 2000. That's the one that really kind of like was the explosion moment, really.